Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today I got a fun and exciting episode for you guys today because we're taking another look at ShaderGlass. About 4 months ago, I did a video on the initial 1.0 release and absolutely everyone fell in love with the concept of what ShaderGlass did. The developer Mousemus did an absolutely outstanding job of bringing all sorts of CRT filters, other scanline filters, shadow masks, and the like over to a PC environment so you could put shadow masks and any other filter atop any game you wanted to play. And since then, the dev has updated it to version 1.1.0, bringing in a ton of new quality of life improvements, a lot of frame rate and capture fixes, and just making this an overall way better experience than even version 1.0, which I already said was incredible. So we're going to be taking a tour through the new ShaderGlass today, talking about how to use it and exactly what it does. Before we get too far involved though, to be a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. And you just saw there that I turned scan lines off to on, and now I'm just playing with all sorts of different filters on the most recent arcade version of Samurai Showdown. This is just going to allow you to articulate any sort of image you want. If you want to make it look like an old composite CRT television, you're going to be able to do that. If you want to just put scan lines atop a modern game in 4K, it's going to have 4K scan lines as well. This has the entire RetroArch CRT shader suite inside of it, along with a ton of other filters, and now, like I said a little bit ago, it updated to version 1.1.0 that brought in a bunch of new filters. The shader library is refreshed. It also has the ability to go ahead and run at 100% frames per second by default now, and just has a lot of other options to make this basically a seamless process. All you do is open up ShaderGlass, put it atop whatever game you are playing, and then you'll have a menu to adjust every single shader you want. And this isn't just for 3D, it's going to be incredible for any sort of game. If you move over into a late 80s or early 90s 2D arcade game, being able to have a little bit of that CRT bend on the corners and putting those scan lines over top are just going to be absolutely fun. But if you want to turn them off, you can just go straight back to a normal raw pixel output and then just turn on scan lines without that CRT curvature at the edges. There are hundreds upon hundreds of filters and options you're going to be able to adjust within ShaderGlass, making whatever image you want for whatever game you want to play around with. Now trust me, there's some in there you're going to wonder who would use them, but having options is awesome, and you can also add all of these different filters to your favorites folders and even name them for the game you're playing them as, so you can kind of just adjust whatever filter you want and whatever look you want for whatever game you want. And even for more modern 2D stuff like a Sura Blade here, getting this curvature on the edges, getting that aperture grill, and a little bit of the bloom and softness almost like it's an S-video signal just gives the game a completely different vibe and flair. Now don't get me wrong, I do love a good raw pixel output, but playing around with ShaderGlass has just given these games so much new life to the point in time where it kind of feels like it's close to having an arcade CRT in front of you that needs a little bit of a rehab as you can get, because trust me, as a CRT collector, they are heavy, they are annoying to deal with, and while I love them, having something like this kind of does 99% of the same effect without having a massive 27-inch very heavy TV on a stand next to you that moving kind of causes back pain. Because trust me, if you don't own a CRT, yes, they're worth it, and yes, they're absolutely heavy, and some of them require 2 or more people to even move around. But I just love this look right here, this kind of gritty, kind of dingy sort of S-video signal with that curvature. But again, if you don't like this, you can dial in whatever other look you want. Believe me, comment down below if you are going to use filters. Are you just doing shadow mask, aperture grills, and scan lines? Are you kind of playing around with the composite blending and the overall curvature as well? I'd be very curious to hear what you guys like to do out there, because there's so many different options and so many different people want different looks. But you can go from something like this with all of the curvature on the screen and the scan lines, and you can move over to more of a traditional capture. Now do be aware, with compression artifacts on YouTube, it can be very difficult to get a good image compressed in, so if you see any weirdness, that is the YouTube capture and that is not me. But unfortunately, that's something I really can't fight against, because all of the videos are compressed before you view them, so what's on my screen and what would be on your screen if you're using ShaderGlass is going to appear slightly different than if you're just actually watching it on YouTube. But you can see here in real time, you can cycle through basically any look for any sort of game you want. Something like this kind of film grain with a little bit of those film hairs on there and those silver halide crystals in the background. I don't know if this is how I would play the game, but it definitely is a vibe, it's an aesthetic, and if it's something for you, it definitely will look great on your television. And the nice thing is a lot of these filters in the folders are going to have versions for 1080p, for 1440p, and even for 4K. So you're going to have the resolution for the filters to be able to do something like this on your 4K OLED if you want. Maybe you want to go to that composite blend again and make it look like you're just playing on an old crappy CRT with just that yellow, red, and white input in the background on a 4K OLED, just to kind of mix and match things. The best part about ShaderGlass is you get to bring the recipes and you decide what tastes good and what doesn't. Or if you take a look at something like the most recent The House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn, this is just with scan lines over the top, and it gives it a little bit more of an analog feel versus a traditional full digital feel. But because this is a horror game, keep in mind that when you're playing around in genres, not just in the type of game it is, but the type of content, maybe something like one of these VHS blur filters is going to actually up the overall horror aesthetic. And because Sega loved to copy and paste zombies in The House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn, having a little bit more blur on the screen kind of actually makes it, unless you're up close, harder to tell that you are shooting the same zombie over and over again. So in some ways these filters can add atmosphere to the games, and in other ways if you pick the wrong filter it's just going to be absolutely hilarious. But again, with a mouse click you're going to be able to change from 1 to 2 to 10 to 20 filters at basically as fast as you can click your mouse, and that is the awesome part about something like ShaderGlass. It gives you the freedom to articulate whatever image you want, and you don't have to wait for anything to render, you don't have to wait for anything to actually get itself set up. It is instantaneous. And this is going to run on pretty much any decent PC out there. Now I do have an i9-12900K as well as a 3080 Ti, and this does render through your GPU. So if you have something like an integrated iGPU, you might not get the exact same results you see here, but you don't need to bring a super expensive graphics card to the party. So long as you have an independent GPU, something newer than a moldy russet potato, you should be getting really good performance out of ShaderGlass yourself. But if you have played around with this application, if there's anything slow about it, let me know what GPU you're using down below, because I would be curious. Now in a game like this, Dead Heat, moving over to the VHS aesthetic and racing through Chicago, the city I have lived in for 15 years, this to me is just an absolute vibe. There's no other way to classify it. This is not a quote-unquote good-looking image, but it absolutely is a mentally appealing image. You get a little bit more motion blur in the edges because you do have that kind of composite VHS look going on, and it still runs at every bit the same frame rate as it would if you weren't using ShaderGlass, because the game is running underneath the window. And seeing Lakeshore Drive, a road I take at least once a week if not more, in this VHS look kind of has a very nostalgic feeling for me. Obviously it's in 16:9, not 4:3, but even in old racers, something like Cruisin' here in the arcade version in MAME, getting scanlines over the top kind of make the game look just a little bit softer around the edges as far as the overall analog look is concerned. Or even 3D games in MAME, something like Solar Assault here. The graphics aren't the most impressive thing in the world in 2025, but if you put scanlines over the top, if you use those aperture masks, things like that, you're going to get a more pleasing look depending on what it is you're going for. But again, the nice thing about a program like this is you kind of just get to decide what you think looks good. And for me personally, a filter on one game I don't think looks as good as a filter on another game. It depends if it's 2D or 3D, it depends if it's a bright game or a dark game, it even depends on the overall tone of the game. Something like a bright cheery game versus a horror game I think are going to look better or worse in different filters because they're going to provide different aesthetics. You don't want a super bright image on something like The House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn, but kind of muting the colors down a little bit and giving it a darker tone and a little bit blurrier of a tone works. Or something like a light gun shooter here, this is basically just going to emulate the look of an old VHS tape, and it has a completely different vibe to it. So it's one of those things, you can craft your own narratives and stories visually just by articulating the image around. And that's something I definitely love to talk about because I am a filmmaker by trade, and I have worked as a college professor of film and television, so the look of an image is every bit as important, if not more so, than the content on the screen every once in a while. And that's what ShaderGlass is. It is an image creation tool to allow you to kind of realize what you think a game should look like. And because it has been updated compared to the last time I talked about it, it is just that much easier to use. And honestly, it's so incredibly easy to get ShaderGlass up and running. I'm not even going to do a tutorial later on this week unless you guys really want to see one, because if you can double click an executable, if you can drag windows around, and if you can click different filter options in a third window, you're going to be able to use ShaderGlass for everything it offers. The only tricky thing is capturing this via OBS you just have to go to game capture, not window capture or display capture, or else you're not going to actually see the effects over top the screen. But honestly, something like Outrun 2, just being able to play around with the image is so much fun. And I know so many of you love filters, especially in RetroArch, so being able to use those outside the RetroArch program on any single emulator or even Steam game you want is going to be a 10 out of 10 fun time. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me, of all the filters you use, which one's the most common. For me, I'd probably say it's just straight up scan lines. But short of that, there is a link in the description below to the most recent version of ShaderGlass. Run, don't walk to grab it because the developer has done an amazing job, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.